All right, so today we're going to dive into the story of a database you might not have heard of, but one that was, well, quietly super influential in the world of technology. We're talking about InterBase.
And really, this quote says it all, doesn't it? SQL power without the admin pain. That was the whole idea, the core promise that made InterBase so interesting right from the very beginning. It set out to solve a huge problem for developers.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start at the beginning, why it was even created. Then we'll get into the cool tech that made it tick. We'll cover the huge moment it went open source and what happened next. We'll even talk about how you could fit it on a floppy disk. Yeah, really. And then we'll wrap it all up with its legacy. Let's do this.
All right, let's get into it. Our story starts with this really simple but kind of revolutionary idea. What if SQL wasn't just for the big guys with massive IT departments? So, you gotta picture it. It's 1985. Ashton Tate puts out this thing called InterBase, and its mission was crystal clear. It had to be light, it had to be fast, and, this is the big one, it had to be easy to manage. They were bringing the full power of SQL to personal computers, which, honestly, that was just not something you saw every day back then.
And this right here, this was the absolute heart of it. The idea that you didn't need a super specialized, expensive database administrator just to keep your app running. I mean, you could install it, fire it up, and basically just let it do its thing. That was a total game changer at the time.
So, you might be asking, how in the world did they pull that off? Well, let's pop the hood and see what made this thing so special.
Just look at these features. You've got a self-contained installation, triggers, stored procedures, full ACID compliance. I mean, this was the kind of stuff you'd expect to find in massive, crazy expensive databases from Oracle or Sybase. But InterBase bundled all that power into this little package you could get running in minutes. It was like having enterprise-level muscle in a small business footprint.
And maybe its biggest claim to fame, its most important innovation, was this thing called multi-version concurrency control, or MVCC for short. And this was huge. Basically, it meant that people reading the database never got in the way of people writing to it, and the other way around. No more locking each other out. It was just this really elegant solution to a super common, messy problem. It's a technique that other databases like Postgres would later become famous for.
And because it was so robust and you could just set it and forget it, InterBase became the go-to for places where failure was just not an option. We're talking critical systems in hospitals, in banks, and inside all sorts of embedded devices where reliability was everything.
Okay, so every good tech story has that one moment, that pivot, where everything changes. And for InterBase, that moment was when it stepped into the world of open source.
So, fast forward to the year 2000. Borland owns InterBase now, and they decide to open source it. But what happens next is what's really interesting. The community, wanting to secure its future, almost immediately forked the project. And that fork? It became its own legendary open source database, Firebird.
And just like that, you have this fork in the road. On one side, you've got the original InterBase. It stayed a commercial product, eventually ended up with Embarcadero, and got really tightly woven into the Delphi development world. On the other side, you have Firebird, which just took off as this completely independent, community-driven project, carrying that open-source flame forward.
But, beyond all the cool internal tech, one of the most practical and honestly, one of the coolest things about InterBase was just how portable it was. Seriously, forget about all those complicated config files and table spaces scattered all over a server. With InterBase, your entire database, all your tables, your data, your triggers, all of it, lived inside one single, neat little file, the .gdb file. This made doing things like backups or just moving a database from one machine to another unbelievably easy.
And because of that single file design, the whole thing was so small and efficient, you could literally run an entire application, database and all, right off a floppy disk. Just think about that for a second. But don't let the small size fool you. This thing was powerful enough to be embedded in serious hardware and to run real-world business apps that people depended on every single day.
And that's really what it all boils down to. This quote nails it. It really was SQL for the rest of us. By tearing down the walls of cost and complexity, InterBase basically democratized the relational database. It put real SQL power into the hands of developers and small teams who never would have been able to touch the big, expensive alternatives.
So when you zoom out and look at the whole history of databases, where does InterBase fit in? What's its final legacy? I think its legacy is that of a quiet innovator that punched way above its weight. It pioneered MVCC years before it was cool. It dragged SQL out of the sterile data center and onto our desktops and into our devices. And maybe most importantly, it proved that you could have all the power of a relational database without all the insane complexity.
And that's really the thing to remember. The simplicity of InterBase wasn't because it was lacking features. No, not at all. It was simple because it was smart. It was the result of some incredibly clever, elegant engineering that was designed from day one to just work.
And that's the story of InterBase. It really makes you think, doesn't it? For every big-name tech giant that we all know, how many other quiet innovators like InterBase were out there, laying the groundwork for the world we live in now? I'd love to know, what other unsung heroes of tech do you think deserve their own story? Thanks so much for tuning in.